The things
Is
that
it?
I'm seeing so many things that are extremely disturbing.
I
And
hear you.
and I think there's a lot of the people that are not reading the signs. They're not reading the signs. They're missing the thing. And I want to make a statement. And that is, South Africa is a democratic dictatorship.
Well, I think more so now, yes. Definitely more so now. In terms of, if you think about um, the provisions they've just passed, I was actually sitting in the IEC meeting today, and they have this new portion in the Electoral Act about the non-represented parties, and the requirement for a non-represented party to get into the electoral process now. Now, I don't know if you know much about the electoral process. You used to have a proportional list and a provincial list. Okay,
Yes.
and basically to enjoy the benefits of the whole system, it's best to be on both lists, on your proportional list and your provincial list, because then your provincial counts towards your proportional. So it basically gives you a double on 2 votes on a single vote. It actually counted towards it when it came to your proportional representation. So the more provinces you were involved in, the better you ended up doing in the proportional lists. Now, what they've done is they've now come up with a rule that says that in order to participate, if you're a non-represented company, you need signatures to prove representation. Even if you've been a political party that has participated in elections over the last 15 years, and even if you have local representation, that doesn't count. Then now you have to have national representation, and if you don't, then in order to appear on both the provincial and the proportional lists, you need a total of 48,000 signatures
Wow.
in order to participate. 48,000 signatures. Now, yes, they don't have to be members and they don't have to vote for you, but think of the logistics of collecting 48,000 signatures, because they require the actual signature.
So these digital things that we're doing is useless.
Well, that's as far as they're concerned, what we heard today, they want the actual signature. So think
Richard,
about collecting 48,000 signatures, the logistics and the cost just on doing that. And then once
Richard,
you've got 48,000 signatures, then you've got to come up with 750,000 Rand deposit. And once you've done that, only then can you start campaigning.
okay. Now, I'm going to make another wild statement. They are desperately trying to incite a civil war.
That's an interesting statement. That is a very interesting statement.
You heard what Zuma said.
I didn't inform.
And that he made that one statement in which he said, if MK gets any indication that there's been fiddling with the votes, they will pay for it. Now, I sent you that video clip of that professor, that
Yeah.
Zulu professor.
Yeah.
And
Those
if
were
you listen,
strong words. Those were strong words.
if you listen very carefully to what he is actually saying, you need to be deeply concerned, because what he is saying in layman's terms is, listen, you call it a democracy. The Zulus are 25 million people. How much representation does the Zulus have
in Parliament?
And, when you talk to me about what they are doing now with that signatures they require, I listen to a guy like that professor. I listen to the things that Zuma says. And I think by now, I'm paying a lot of attention to what MK is doing, because I have got my opinion. I think 2 days ago in one of my Skidmarks I blatantly said it. If that professor from Northwest University can make statements like he's making, I'm going to take the same liberty and I'm going to say what I see is going to happen. And if I listen to the guys that I'm talking and that are talking to me, let's call it on the ground, from Zululand, I'm telling you, I've said it this morning to that concerned Zulu of mine, my biggest worry as I'm sitting here talking to you is a civil war in Zululand. Because if that happens, the whole country will be on fire. And the problem that the Zulus, the right-minded Zulus have, that professor has given an indication of the things that they are talking about. And another problem that they have now is they are concerned, upset, angry, whatever you want to call it, about the fact that there is strong indicators that their current king has been captured by Triple X. And they are, I spoke to the one guy and I said to him, okay, but say you guys UDI, what are you going to do with that contaminated officials? And he bluntly stated it. His words to me was, have you forgotten about Chaka's Rock? I said, well, okay, this is the problem. There's a
And
lot
what
of
percentage?
that are
You see,
pushing. Excuse
look, I
me?
think there's a lot of interest in heading down that path. A lot of interest. I mean, I think it would help a lot of players in the game if it did head down that route. Because if you think about it, if you make it unmanageable, then the ANC doesn't have to call elections, and the government can declare state of emergency, and all those different permutations come out, and then you can get rid of democracy, because then because it's now become a bit of a problem. Because it's not going down the pathway that you wanted it to go, because you're now losing support. So I think there's a vested interest in making sure war breaks out in order to
Okay.
secure the positions up there. I think that's the vested interest, because you can get rid of all the liberties in terms of the limitation, in terms of the state of emergency clause in the Constitution. You can get rid of all the liberties, and it's very easy to run a country when it's in a state of emergency. It's very easy to tramp on rights in a state of emergency. So one mustn't be too keen heading down that path, because it plays into certain vested interest hands when that happens. Now, I believe that when you're talking self-determination, I agree with you. I think that Colleen, I think the Zulus should do it. I think they aren't properly represented. I mean, the ANC, I think, utilized, the Zuma element to gain power in KwaZulu-Natal, because they knew they required that, but they alienated him from the minute he walked into power. They
Yeah.
alienated him. I
This
mean,
is the thing. I
they
said
made
it in
him
that
yeah.
I said it in that Skidmark. That professor can yap. MK is a safety net for the ANC. What that guy does not understand is in Zuma's Zulu heart, he has been betrayed by the ANC.
Of course he has. I mean, they betrayed him from the beginning.
And he's not going to forget that. He's not
No.
going to. And then there's these crazy people that say, yeah, Malema will be the new president if there's now whatever they want to do with it. And this one Zulu said to me, okay, Malema comes from a tribe of 3 million people. But there's a lot of questions about, is he really from that tribe? Or where is he actually from? And what makes him think 25 million Zulus is going to accept him as the president?
But you see, one thing the ANC has been able to do is to try and make that tribal identity disappear.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
problem
yeah.
is, though, if you think of old Mbeki's days, I mean, the dominant group in his era was the Xhosas.
Yes.
I mean, all the money flowed towards that element and towards that. Then, when Zuma came in, there was an upsetting of that apple cart, and we had a lot of. I mean, I remember in Tshwane Council when all of a sudden you had two posts, and one guy was just kind of shifted aside and told to sit on a chair when somebody else came in, because it was now his turn to. But you see the difference between the two periods of time. I mean, if you think about it, who got rid of the scorpions initially?
Uh, uh, Atlanta.
Mbeki.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Well,
Mbeki.
he
He
started
started
in
the
Atlanta
thinking. Mutante got rid of them. Why? They were
because
beginning to investigate the arms deal, and they were beginning to investigate that corruption through the arms deal and everything. So they get rid of that arm. So who really started the state capture?
Mickey.
Mbeki. When did the Guptas come into power? Come into South Africa? During whose time did they start dealing with government? Mbeki. So all those elements were already in place, but they needed a scapegoat. And I mean, they've disliked Zuma from the beginning because he's a local, he's a popularist, he's a local, and he's a culturalist. So they needed to get rid of him. That's why the rape charges, and I mean that is so typical leftist attack. If you think about it, the leftist attack has always been to try and find some form of infidelity or rape or something like that to accuse a person of, and to tarnish their name. I mean, that's always
Character,
been the modus
character
operandi.
assassination. Character
That's
assassination is their game.
tool
That's
number
what.
one. Tool
And you
number
know,
one.
I listened a little bit earlier. I listened to Katie Hawkins, that English girl. She's very mouthy, and she doesn't.
She calls a spade a spade.
Sure, she talks Boerans only in English. But the fact
Yes.
of the matter is, she said something very important about the farmers in Wales. And she said, these people have been on the land for generations.
Yeah.
Where does a pen pusher come from or get the right to tell them how to cultivate their land, how to breed their cattle, how to grow their stuff? Where?
But
Where
you see,
does
they
it?
don't have that right. They don't. The problem
Exactly.
is that, you see, this is centralization of control again, like we spoke last time we discussed. Once again, this is and this is what you're talking about. It isn't just South Africa. It's happening everywhere. And it's happening under this disguise of the lie of global warming. And I'm going to say it's a lie.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm going to say it's a lie, because yes, I believe the Earth goes through its periods of hot and cold, and I remember I read an interesting article the other day that was talking about global issues and how since the 1960s, every decade we've had a global issue,
Yes, yes, yes,
and every
yes.
single time, what was the common denominator between all those global issues?
Texas.
Increase in taxes, right?
Yeah.
So every single time there's an increase in taxes. This is just another one of those, but there's a sting added to this one: control.
Yeah,
It's no
yeah.
longer taxes; it's now control, because they're beginning to affect the methods on farming. They're beginning to affect your travel methods. They're beginning to affect how much resources you use. They're beginning to affect all those things. And what they're trying to do, they're trying to take you as an individual, and they're trying to say, you cannot utilize any more resources.
Yes.
You've become a
Now,
liability.
now you know I've been preaching the tribal thing for the past 6, 7 months.
Yeah.
And when I started with it, a lot of people thought I was crazy. And if you look carefully what is happening currently in Europe, in England, and North America, you see signs of tribal awakening.
Yes.
You're seeing it. I made a predicament. I predicted that the EU would fall apart by December 2023. That was a little bit optimistic, but with
I
the
think
stunt
longer
that,
than that.
Macron pulled yesterday in suggesting European nations must send soldiers into Ukraine, I think he advanced the timeline about 100 clicks, because all
Because
of
you
a
got
sudden,
Poland and all those places that are not interested
not
whatsoever.
at all.
Yeah.
And there are actually European countries that are
You're
vehemently
declaring
against it.
war. I mean,
Yeah,
you're declaring Third World War.
the
That's
fact
what
of
you're doing, because they're not a NATO nation. Ukraine
yeah.
is not NATO. So the minute that the Europeans walk into Ukraine, they're in trouble, because then they've started World War III.
Now, the problem for Europe is that MSM has been lying to them.
Yeah.
All their leadership has been lying to them. What very few people, guys like me, that really followed that war fairly closely. The Russians has got in the Rostov-on-Don area 350,000 troops, fully equipped, fully geared. And here comes the kicker. They're not geared with the same equipment that is currently fighting in Ukraine.
No.
Because what the Russians has been doing in Ukraine is they kept on matching the Ukraine military. So they didn't go in with the best of the best. They went in with equipment that matched the Ukrainians. And because Putin said he's going to demilitarize Ukraine. And if you look carefully and objectively at what's happening there, you can see that the Russians has been grinding the military wing of Ukraine to pieces. They don't bomb civilians. They don't bomb cities haphazardly like NATO did and things like that. They don't do it. But every time NATO sends in a new wonder weapon, takes about 2 weeks, and the Russians neutralize the thing. They don't overwhelm it. They just neutralize it. And they send another one. And so the Russians click up slowly. The problem for the West is they have no idea. There's rumors, but they've got no idea what the Russians actually have in stock. And if you listen to that one comment that Putin made to a journalist, when the journalist told him that there's rumors of NATO forces building up in Romania and in Poland. And Putin said, if NATO attack, I want to warn the citizens of Europe, you will see hell like you cannot imagine.
You see, I don't think Putin's at a place of desperation. I mean, he's doing
No,
better
he's
now
not.
than he did. He's doing better now than he did before sanctions. He's doing better now than. Yes, he's lost a couple of battles, but like you said, they've just slowly but surely ramped up. And I mean, from everything that I've heard, it's a foregone conclusion that he's going to win the war. It's a foregone conclusion, because there's just no ways that his opposition can keep it up. And I mean, you're already seeing cracks in America when it comes to funding, and they're the main funders.
Sure.
Let's be honest, they're the main funders. And if they stop funding, that's going to be a major setback for Ukraine. And the realities are, the Americans are already looking as if they've lost interest in funding it any longer, because I know that the Republicans are a bit reticent about funding at the moment, and they're trying to, the Biden is trying every trick in the book. He's combining it with Israel, and he's doing all these things to try and get the funding pushed through. But I mean, as soon as Ukraine loses that, it's done. But I mean, it could have been done a long time ago, from what I understand. and from what's being said, that they were already talking about peace, a peace deal. But Boris Johnson said, no, it's got to continue. So, look, it is what it is in that scenario. I think everybody knows the Ukraine ain't going to win. To go over to World War III.
You see, here comes the bad news, Richard. Stoltenberg from NATO himself, this week has acknowledged that Europe doesn't have the manpower for a war. They don't have the production capacity for ammunition.
They've lost that long ago. China's taken over production long ago. I mean, England just closed its last full iron ore smelter. They've just closed it. Mattel has just closed it, which means they have no manufacturing capacity when it comes to argument. All they can do in England right now is basically take old steel and rework old steel. That's okay. They've got arc smelters at the moment. That's it.
Okay. Now, the guys that understands the military well, they say to you, England has got the following problems. Their Air Force, more than half of their airplanes is not functional. The half that is still functional, they don't have enough pilots. As when it comes to armory, they've got, I think, a ridiculous number, 20 or 30 or something like that, functional tanks, because they gave what they had to Ukraine. And they say if England should get into a war like the Ukrainian war, it will be 5 days and England will have no ammunition. No ammunition. And then we had last week that joke when they tried to test that Trident intercontinental ballistic missile of theirs. They fired the damn thing. It came out of the submarine and out of the water and fell right next to the submarine. Okay, that's a great one. And then a few months ago, we had that bloody joke with their aircraft carrier that they wanted to send on some mission to go and brag somewhere. The thing has been standing in the docks for 3 years, refurbishing it, a brand new thing. They refurbished it to sort out the problems. That thing left the dock, and within 2 hours, they had to tow it back to the dock. Great. Then you come to NATO. NATO is out of arms. They're out of armament. And the guy says clearly, if NATO gets into the war with Russia, 5 days, no ammunition. Now they're scrounging ammunition for Ukraine in Africa. They're scrounging for 155 mil ammunition. Europe, that I think it was in Bulgaria, is that ammunition factory that they fired up and said, okay, you must make ammunition. The guy says, yeah, sure, we can make. But you guys have stopped our access to Russia, so we can't get gunpowder and we can't get some other stuff for the 155s. Said, okay, so we can make 6,000 rounds a month. America is ramping up their 155 production. They make 24,000 a month. The reality is in the Ukraine, on a good day, they shoot 60,000 rounds on a good day. And the Russians, they keep on shooting. Now the rumors are coming out, okay, the Russians are capable of doing about 1 million rounds a month. That's their capacity, production capacity. The Chinese can make 1 million rounds a day. So where is all of this going? That's my favorite name for them, the triple X, is in a flat panic, Richard. They're in a flat panic. They know they're going to lose in Ukraine big time. 6 or 7 months ago, I did a Skidmark and I made a joke in it. And I said, this thing started off like this. Zelensky phoned Putin and said, hey, Uncle Putin, they want to kill me here. They say, wait, relax now. Just relax. What you're going to do now, you're going to try and get as much money out of them as you can and as much weapons as you can. Don't worry about the weapons. We'll handle the weapons. And once we've got them bankrupt and disarmed, I'll pick you up and you can go and live somewhere in the Caucasus. And a lot of guys laughed about it. But look at what is on the table today, Richard. The EU is bankrupt.
But now let
America
me put
is
a
bankrupt.
scenario to you. Let me put a
Huh?
scenario.
Okay.
Okay, you've got clever boys on both sides, right?
Yes. Yes.
Now, if your main uh, industry is
Yeah.
armaments, because we know that, I mean, the war machine in America, that's their big
That's,
business. I mean,
that's
that's their
basically all they have.
pretty much that's what America, that and selling you movies is about all they have, and the movies have been declining quite considerably in the last while. You've had to print more money than you know. I mean, than you can believe. Just to keep the system going. So they've printed money like it's going out of fashion. So you now want to go into that thing that makes you the most money. What is that?
The war.
You need a war
Yeah, yeah.
because that's the way you keep people distracted. I mean, the Roman Empire did the same thing. When the people started getting a bit antsy, they went to war and they started annexing and collecting resources from other people. You know what I mean? That's the old. It's the same old game. It's if you run out of resources, you need to get it somewhere else. Now, America generates its resources by going to war. Okay, so now you're looking at the world at the moment, and you want to create this war. Isn't it sometimes the best thing to make your enemy think he's already won?
Uh, if you asked me that question 2 years ago,
Yeah,
I would have said yes. But knowing what I know, military industrial capacity of Russia, knowing what I know about the military industrial capacity of Iran,
yeah.
of China, of North Korea, that bluff is not going to work on Putin. That bluff is not going to work on Putin.
No, I don't mean bluff. I mean bluff to encourage the attack. You
Put,
understand what I'm saying?
and that is where that's where they also are in out of their depth because Putin is not a guy that makes any decisions on emotion. Nothing. I mean, Biden called him a stupid son of a bitch. The reporter asked Putin about that. Putin says, listen, I don't call leaders of other countries names, but it's actually a shame that the leader of America does that.
Yeah,
And
I
he
mean,
walks away from it. And he walks away from it. And
yeah,
this is what the West cannot handle. They cannot cope. If you look at a table and all the leaders sit there, look at the Russian leadership. Putin, Lavrov, Shoigu. Those are solid, level-headed men. And you look on the other side of the table, you've got stupid idiots like that Ursula von der Crazy and Annalena Dambak, and you've got that Blinken. I mean, those guys they are amateurs if you compare them to the. And then you must not forget the Chinese. They're sitting here in the back and they're watching this story. Now, I don't know if I mentioned to you, the Chinese has got an old saying that they say, if you sit on the beach long enough, an island will float by. What does that tell you about their mentality? Patience. They
patience.
don't rush. The Chinese don't rush. The only hot potato in that basket is Rocket Man from North Korea.
Yeah,
But I think Putin and Xi Jinping, both of them, they just pick the phone up and say, hey, stop your shit. And it's over. You know, but he's there. But he's the guy that I think that, is just keeping the Oaks happy and keeping them busy and keeping them excited. But I saw a video that was done of a motor show in Moscow, and there was Iranian vehicles there. Richard, I was absolutely stunned when I saw the engineering of that industry from Iran. we don't know much about Iran. The West actually knows nothing about Iran. And I looked at the axles and the gearboxes and the differentials for the big trucks that Iran is manufacturing themselves. And they reminded me a lot about what South Africa did when we were bombarded with the sanctions. I mean,
Yeah.
fantastic shit came out of South Africa. And then there's another thing that very few people actually pay attention to. There's a hell of a lot of South Africans working in Iran in the weapons industry. And then you look at the performance of the Iranian missiles, and you just have to shake your head because a lot of it looks so Denel, yeah, and things like that. And now the West is trying everything to instigate Putin to do something that will give them the excuse of escalating, which he's not doing. All he's doing, he's batting. He hasn't bowled a single ball. He's just batting. Cup, cup, cup. And that's what it. But what is now happening in Europe? All those little fox terriers sitting there on the Baltics and so that has been chow, 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 and trying to get the American dog into the fight. They realize now, oh shit, the big dog is not going to come to this fight. And the gate is open. This other oak is cruising down the fence, but the gate is open. And now they're trying to get themselves out of those positions. But they can't do that without losing control over their own constituents.
Yeah.
It's the way the public is beginning to wake up to it. Look at those massive pro-Palestinian protests that you see almost in every country. And you have to ask yourself, how is that happening? That a country like America, a massive pro-Palestinian protest in Washington, how does that happen? In London, in Berlin, everywhere. And you have to start thinking, what is happening to the mindset of the people? And the politicians, for the last, I would say, 30 years, they've been living very cozy in their little bubbles. And it reached a point where they were of the opinion that they've got everything under full control. But what is now happening on the streets is the people are beginning to realize, but listen, yeah, it's a handful of politicians, but we are millions. They can't stop us.
But I
And
think if you look at the element that you're talking about, Europe has created a problem, and it was Gaddafi that started with that. I mean, he was the first one to say that with Europe we'll take over Europe through mass immigration. We'll outbreed them because
yeah, yeah,
they're a declining group. I mean, their birth rates are below the 2.5%, which is required for just to maintain your population. They've been below that for a long time. I think a lot of those European countries are sitting on like 1.8% sort of thing,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and from when they started with their whole birth control thing. So I believe that this is something the getting rid of the European population has been happening for a long time,
Oh, yes.
and that war has been fought very effectively, and I think it's been fought from within.
Yeah,
You know, the biggest problem you do for yourself as a nation is by reducing your population growth.
for
I
sure.
mean, every system that the Western nation is based on population growth. I mean, your pension funds, all those things are based on population growth, not population decline.
For sure.
And 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 that's why we see the total dismantling of all those social programs that were in place, all those things. I mean, if you think of the introduction of universal health care in all those European countries, I mean, that is what's destroying those governments. That is what's causing those governments to be bankrupt, because that is the single biggest expenditure on the books of any government in the Western nation is healthcare. And they're being milked dry by big, huge multinational, drug companies. They're being milked dry by the drug companies. So all these processes, I think, was the general decline. And this is the final stage, is where you bring your army in. And that's what this has been about. The mass immigration has been about bringing in the army to bring about the civil war. We mentioned the other day, what does mass immigration do to a country? It ensures that your youth don't get jobs. That's
Yeah,
all it
yeah.
does. It ensures that low-level jobs are disappearing. So what happens is you're now creating a youth that is now despondent, and you're bringing in, what are you bringing in from these other countries? Youth. Most of the people walking across the borders are young men.
Yeah,
That's an
well,
army. That's an
yeah.
army.
I
And
call it, in my skidmark that I launched, that I published this morning, I said, that is the triple X soldiers. That's what
yes,
they are there to destroy those countries. Because what is the dream of these globalists? They want to unify America, Mexico, and Canada. That's one thing they want to do. They want a
all of
unified
Europe,
Europe. That's what they
all of
want.
Africa.
And they're using these. I read a document that someone sent to me that they got from the UN, in the UN dark dungeons, where it stated the aim is to get 100 million immigrants into America. And then they take over America and they amalgamate America and Mexico. But I personally believe that the response to the pestilence, that this Triple X did not expect so many people to wake up to what's happening. And now they're in a panic and they are rushing their plans. Now, when I was still a young guy and I was training guys to take their ski boats into the Zululand surf, I mean, that's a wild surf. And I've always said to the guy, on the last day of training, when I hand the controls over to him, I say to him, just remember one thing. Whatever you do not panic. Because if you panic,
That's
you
when
will
mistakes
fuck up. Not
make
may
mistakes.
fuck up, you will fuck up.
Yeah.
And this is what we are seeing now, panic. Panic everywhere in Europe. Now, where is this going to end? Back to the tribes. It is people, Europeans, in their own traditional communities will have to pull together and defend themselves against whatever is around them. And I said it to a guy last night. I said to him, the problem with the youth of today, and that is for South Africans, Boere as well, my generation, we have been in situations where you would, in a, let's call it a situation, and the guy next to you develop holes. And then for you to survive, you have to make holes and oaks on the other side. Now, how many youngsters really has the guts to make that hole? I think that the people is beginning to understand, okay, there is a mechanism at work here to wipe us out. They're beginning to understand that. But they haven't made peace with how to respond to that.
Yeah. You see, luckily we've got what I believe is the natural order. I think that's the one luck we have. And all you have to do is ensure that whatever you do, that your plan is within that natural order, because everything we're experiencing at the moment is not the natural order.
Exactly.
You know, I want to take you back to something biblical. I know you
Yeah.
don't really. If you go and look at the Tower of Babel, okay,
Yes.
and when they were centralizing that centralizing power and centralizing economy, I mean, they were busy building. I mean, you had Nimrod that went to his fellow men and said, let us make name for ourselves so that we can keep the people here, because the people were naturally beginning to dissipate into all the areas of the earth. They were beginning to dissipate. And he said, well, let's keep the people here. We want to rule over them. We want to have control. So they made name for themselves in order to keep the people there. Then they built an economy. They built a centralized economy around building a Tower of Babel. Now, that tower, if you think about the economy around it, you'd have to bricks, mortar, you'd have to bring all that material in. You'd have to feed the people bringing that material in. You'd have to house all those people. It's a proper centralized economy. And how was that problem solved? With language and culture.
Yeah.
Language and culture.
Yes.
Language and culture broke down that central control. So the solution to that centralized control was to go back, or was to go into a system of devolution, okay?
Yes.
Because that is seen as a bad thing. The whole analogy we get out of it is centralization is a bad thing, and the way to decentralize is to go back to the natural order of things. And what was the natural order? Multiple languages, multiple culture was the natural order of things. So when you take it down to that level, that is where it's supposed to be.
Yes.
Because who caused the biggest wars in this world? Was it little tribes?
No.
Or was it dominant totalitarian states?
Yes.
That wanted to force their influence on those around it. Let's go to the Babylonians. What were they about? They were about forcing people under their control. The Medes and the Persians, they were about forcing people under their control. The Romans, they were about forcing people under their control. Every single system that has been bad for this world has been those systems that tried to force people under their control. Yeah. So now, if the natural order is what we're talking about, Ghislaine, if the natural order is tribes, and that is the proper way to to prohibit the strong man from rising up.
Yeah.
Isn't that what we should be encouraging and pushing and I mean doing everything in our power to make it happen?
This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing. And you know how much resistance I get. You know how much attacks I get for that.
But well, what was funny, I was in a meeting on Tuesday, a hearing. We were talking to a municipality, and it was a language issue. And I started mentioning the fact of how important language actually is, and how they've tried to sideline the local languages by creating a dominant English language and forcing everything to be done in that one language. And I started mentioning and the recognition in the people around me,
for sure,
of the importance of their language and the importance of their culture. That gave me more impetus again to go, I think there's definitely fertile ground over there to start looking at that option and start making people feel part of again by recognizing who they are.
Now there's the key, Richard. Recognizing who they are.
Yeah.
What has this ANC been doing for the past 30 years?
Breaking it down.
Desperately trying to wipe out cultural awareness.
Correct.
That's why is the Boere getting so much hatred? Because they are one of the tribes that are preserving their culture and understand the importance of culture and all of that. So, but you're saying the natural order of things. That is the only thing that can survive, Richard.
Yes.
All these other things are synthetic. It's plastic. It will not endure. It may be, it's almost like a flare. You light the thing, And the next moment, there's a hell of a lot of light and a lot of smoke, and that's it. And 10 minutes
And then
later,
it
it's
ends up.
on. And at that time, the guy making his braai fire, he's only reached the stage when he's going to put on thicker logs. And I just have to mention this to you. I don't have anything against religion. I'm a religious man. The reason why I sidestep religious talks on my channel specifically is because it always leads to debates that has no end. There's
No,
no
look, I
end.
understand. You see, I just wanted to use it. I didn't want to use it to promote religion or anything like that. What I was
No, I
trying to
understand. No, and I
I
just
just
wanted
want
to
to
say
say
this
it's a
to you.
lesson that was learned a long time
Yeah,
ago. So whether that religion, whether it's mythical or whether it's true, I'm not going to debate that issue on the Tower of Babel. But what it does, it gives us an example of the problem of centralization.
for
It's
sure.
a
I mean,
prominent story around centralization. And if you think about it, I mean, centralization has been our problem historically.
for sure.
Who's
I mean,
caused the
look,
wars?
what did centralization do to Russia? Killed 47 million people.
There you go. What
What?
did centralization do to China? Killed
Yes,
100 million people.
killed 100 million people. Why can't the people see that those are the two, let's say, standout examples of centralization in our days? Both failed spectacularly.
Well, look at the
Both
decline of America. The
both
decline of
changed.
America started. The decline of America started once the federal government took all the power away from the different states.
For
Once
sure.
that happened, that's when America's problems started. So me and you, Colleen, are on the same book there. There's no argument. If we don't go back to the right system, you're wasting your time. It was Plato and Aristotle that said, you have to find the perfect law in order to bring about a just society.
That brings me back to what I said in my opening statement. This is a democratic dictatorship.
Yes.
And the people do not want to realize that. The other thing is, Richard, with this election, there's people that's got wild hopes for it. The reality is, a dictator does not relinquish power. They don't. They don't. What are they going to use and how they're going to do it to retain the power? We'll have to wait and see. But one thing that I am almost 100% sure of is they cannot bank on MK to help them keep the power, because that kite's not going to fly. And when, I was talking to Zulu guys for the past 8 months. I started around about 8 months ago with my tribal things and so forth. And then I started getting messages from Zulus, and people were, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? And we start talking and so forth. And I don't know if you saw that program that I did with Hein on secession for Zululand specifically. And we did it in English.
Yeah.
I did that. Me and Hein did that on request of one of the king's advisors. He said to me, do something for me that I can give to the prime minister and to the king to look at. And we did that. And isn't it strange? What was the first thing that new prime minister said on that Monday? They want Zululand out from the control of Cape Town. I'm not going to claim fame to it or credit for it at all. I played my role. I did the best I could do. I'm a nothing. I'm not a politician. I'm not a leader. I'm nothing. I'm just a commentator, a guy. But I am willing to talk to people and listen to what they are saying. And so we had that move from the Zulu prime minister. But there's now other things going on in the basement in Zululand. there is a lot of the conservative Zulus that are unhappy with his new prime minister because they say the date of his appointment goes against their tradition. The
Yeah.
new prime minister should have been appointed at the harvest festival or something. And another problem that they have is they say they're still in mourning for Gacha Buthelezi.
Yeah.
But okay, that they'll have to resolve that. And then there's a problem that it's clear that that king is captured. It's not the real, that's not the correct king. But that was a manipulation. Those are things that's got to be resolved. And I am the guy that believes that the only guy that can really prevent civil war in Zululand is Jacob Zuma. He can prevent it or he can start it. He's the
I
guy
think he
that's,
has the clout. He definitely has the clout within the greater KwaZulu-Natal, definitely, without a doubt.
he can
And I
take
think
it any one of these ways.
but you see, I don't know if he will take it there. I think the only one the ones that will start it are the ANC.
I spoke to a guy, a Zulu guy, about that specifically. And we were talking about the EFF and the ANC. And his words to me was, our chiefs are fully aware of this. The king's advisors are fully aware of this. If they try something like that, we will wipe them out. And the problem is that, as me and you have discussed previously, the Zulu specifically, he's first Zulu and then he's in a political party.
Yeah.
And if it's about the Zulu nation, political parties is not going to count. What I found quite interesting is why did the ANC launch their manifesto in Zululand and the EFF launch their manifesto in Zululand? Why? My concerned Zulu said to me, because the Zulus are confused and these guys are trying to take mileage out of that.
Yeah.
And because there was at the stage, there was a rumor that Malema would be launching his manifesto in Ulundi. And that one Zulu guy said to me, he can try that. He's not going to leave Ulundi. He can come here, but he's not going to get out here.
You see, the thing is, they know that there's a vacuum in KwaZulu-Natal because a lot of the support that the ANC got was because Zuma was in the seat.
Yes.
So now you lift Zuma out of that seat, and the first thing that's going to happen is that support that was there purely because Zuma was in the seat
Yes.
becomes undeterminate now. You don't know where it's going.
For sure.
Because
They leader
it might go back to the IFP where it was.
Yeah.
You see, a lot of the Zulus that were voting for Zuma was economic. I mean, they thought, well, if our guy's in charge, then we're going to go and eat at the trough. You know, it's our turn to eat at the trough. The problem is that never happened. It happened to a small minority at the top.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen. It didn't filter down into society as a whole when it comes to the Zulus, because a lot of those positions were already taken up in government. You know, all the top positions were already taken up. So when that prof was talking about what is the Zulu representation in government, he was actually being very honest about the fact that there's a minority representation in the ANC general echelons.
Sure.
When it comes to representation of the dominant crowd. You know,
I've asked Richard, which tribe does the ANC represent?
Well, you see, if you look at its roots, that comes from the Xhosas. I mean, the name that was put forward once liberation was completed, it was, first of all, it was Nelson Mandela, which is a Xhosa. Then it was Mbeki, which is a Xhosa. And the first 10 years or 15 years of ANC rule went to the Xhosas. They were in charge. And that's why you had factional fighting. One of the reasons why you had factional fighting within the ANC was because of that fact. because only one group was basically benefiting from it. You had a few at the top that were making huge, but one group was basically benefiting.
All the time. Now, what
Yes.
happened at Oliver Tambo is a practical example. Up till the end of the Zuma era,
Yeah.
Oliver Tambo, the security contingent at Oliver Tambo was just Zulus. Only Zulus. There was only Zulus there. And then in steps Cyril. And they weeded those Zulus out and brought people from Venda in. And that's when the corruption and the thievery and the theft and all of that shit started at Oliver Tambo. But, my dad was a mine manager. And his indunas were always Zulus. Always. I asked him about it one day, and he said to me, there is not a single ethnic group that can enforce discipline like the Zulus. Now I'm talking 40 years back, but I grew up in Natal among the Zulus. I'm not going to say I know their culture and all of that. I can handle a little bit of Fanagalo and all of that. I'm not good in languages. That's one of my poor attributes. Languages is a hell of a problem for me. I mean, I'm the proud owner of a Latin 1B4 on my degree. I had to do it 4 years to pass the bloody thing. In matric, let me tell you this little thing. Not in matric, standard 9. I get to an English teacher, and the first test, and he called me in and he said to me, listen, you are one of those guys that can never learn a language out of a book. Never. You don't understand the difference between tenses. You don't. You can't. Your brain does not do it. The only way that you are going to master English is by the sound of correct English. So you better start reading. Yes. And I started reading like a maniac.
Yeah.
And you know what books he said to me I should read? Loila Moore and J.T. Edson. There were days in my life, I'm telling you, I read one book a day.
Yeah.
Holidays, that's all I was doing, reading and so forth. Now, when I got to Latin, where the hell do I get books in Latin to read? Where do I...
What is cement is cement.
Yeah. Where do I hear Latin spoken? Nothing. I cannot. And that was the same problem I had. Yeah. And I had the same problem with that's my problem with the Zulu and all of that. I picked up a lot as they talking and here and there, but it's Fanagalo. So if a guy talks and he talks slowly, I can follow what he's trying to say. But I do not get the nuances. I can't, because that's beyond me. So I believe that, and I accept that you don't follow my channel, religiously and so forth. But I started about 6-7 months ago. I did 2 videos, Skidmarks, directed directly at Zuma. And the one, I think if I remember right, the title was, You Must Repair Your Tribe. And the story in it, the gist of it was, you took a portion of your tribe into the ANC kraal, and then you left, and they're there. And the ANC is going to do to those people there exactly what Ngan did to Peter Retief. And amazingly enough, after that Skidmark, I get a message from a guy, it's a colored guy, and he says to me, you know what? We can see that happening. Zulus don't get promotions. Zulus, when their contracts expire, their contracts are not renewed. I said, okay. So they're on the ground level, grondvlak. The people are talking about these things, Richard.
But you see, Ghislaine, it's a natural. It's once again, it's the natural order of things. I mean, no matter how hard you push and how hard you prod and all, you are going to end up always, if you're in a position where you have to employ someone, you're going to look for skills in something that is familiar to you.
Yes.
It's the natural order of things. I mean, it's because you, as the boss, now have to be able to work with that person. And if there's a disjuncture when it comes to behavior and anticipation and those aspects of the workplace, you end up having a dysfunctional workplace. So what when left to its natural order, people will tend to employ that which they feel the most comfortable with. And it's not just the most comfortable when it comes to know-how and knowledge. It's the most comfortable when it comes to communication, when it comes to cooperation, all those aspects which are fundamental to culture and language, because there's a natural affinity within those environments. You see, we have an unnatural environment at the moment. But
For sure.
what happened? I mean, a good example was when I was in Canada. If you want, you couldn't get an airport job. The only people that got jobs at the airport were the sheiks. They were the only ones that got jobs at the airport, because what happened was they ended up bringing in a couple of sheiks, and some of them made it up the ladder. And the minute they got into managerial positions, all they employed was sheiks. So you come to Toronto Pearson International, your porters, I mean, your cleaners, your front desk personnel, everyone is a sheik. And you go, okay, how does that happen? Well, because a person, when left to a natural order, will employ that which he feels most comfortable.
People of the same mind gravitate towards each other.
That's it. Bottom line.
I mean, I spoke to this one guy at FNB. I had to do a fairly complicated process there with him, and he said to me, "Look, it's my lunchtime now. Can we go and have a burger together here at the Wimpy?" I said, "Sure." And we sat, and he said to me, people don't understand how culture works. And I said, "Sure, okay, talk to me." And he said, "Me and my wife, we go out at night and we get to a restaurant, and the vast majority of the people are white. We don't feel but we sit at our table and we're very quiet and we eat and we go." He said, "But if I get to a restaurant and it's full of black people, we socialize, we talk to one another." And he says to me, "Glenn, we are loud. Africans are loud." And I say, "I know." And, Richard, the problem that I see in South Africa is that natural reality has been ignored.
No, suppressed.
Ignored, suppressed.
Forced out.
Yes.
You see the problem, and what do? You then create conflict.
For sure.
Because now when a person isn't in their natural environment, they start feeling unhappy about their environment, and then they're going to start lashing out.
For sure.
Thank you very much, sir.